Ladies and jelly spoons, I have received a commission. Yes, I'm still reading fanfiction, but it's not my fanfiction. I've been commissioned to read someone else's fanfiction. Specifically, I've been commissioned by Donzai Bonsai on Discord to read The Nerevarine Returns by J. Applegate on fanfiction.net. If you are interested in commissioning a video/audio from me, then reach out to me on Discord or at my email, thekawiacat@yahoo.com. The Kawiya Cat being all one word in that instance. So without further ado, let's begin. The Nerevarine's Return by J. Applegate. Prologue. Time. An infinite amount of time had once seemed like an amazing gift. He considered himself lucky, especially considering the negative effects Corpus tended to give those infected with it. He had been given a gift that no other human could ever experience. A chance to see every corner of the world several times over. An opportunity to always be the hero. To save everyone he could and just a few more. These were just some of the things he had to look forward to. All thanks to his gift. A gift much later in the future he considered a curse. It took several years before things settled in Morrowind. Once they had, after a year or two traveling his homeland of Cyrodiil, he decided to set out for a land very few in history had ever been to, Akavir. The Blades had argued he should report back to the Emperor, given he had knowledge and power unlike anything previously available to the Empire. He'd considered the option, but being recruited into the Blades hadn't been an option for him at all. He'd fully paid off his debt to the Emperor by saving Morrowind from Dagoth-Ur, the Tribunal, and Hircine as far as Erenar was concerned. And so, joined by friends, allies, and even a few rivals he picked up, the Nerevarine set off to explore the unexplored continent in the year 429 of the Third Era. Having intended to be an expedition lasting only a couple years, none had expected or been prepared to ultimately stay there for 10. Shipwrecked upon arrival, Erenar and his crew were assailed every day by the various indigenous races of Akavir. For each step in the repairing of their ships, 2 more back were made in recovering from the day in and day out of fighting. By the time they managed to have 1 ship be made seaworthy, and the long journey back to Tamriel began, the over 200-man crew had shrunk to a size of 20. Among the survivors was Aranar Krex, who swore never to leave Tamriel again. Erenar had expected little to have changed in his absence, perhaps a small war or 2 at the most. As it turned out, everything had changed. Mehrunes Dagon had invaded Nirn and unleashed Oblivion Gates across Tamriel. Martin Septim, the bastard child of the Emperor Uriel Septim VII, sacrificed himself to return Mehrunes back to the Deadlands and to seal the rift between Nirn and Oblivion. The hero of Kvatch, the man who'd rescued Martin and closed many Oblivion Gates, vanished after entering a gate unlike any that had been seen during the invasion. The 4th Era had begun, marked by the end of the Septim dynasty. And that was only the beginning. The Empire, now without a descendant of Tiber Septim to lead it, was now run by the Imperial Potentate Okado, previously the High Chancellor of the Elder Council. The Thalmor began to rise in power in the Somerset Isles, home of the High Elves. Blackmarsh seceded from the Empire. Soon after, Varden fell and much of Morrowind had been destroyed by the eruption of Red Mountain. Finding nothing better to do, Erenar began to wander. Months passed like hours, years like days. Wars occurred nearly as often as a full moon, though Erenar took no part in any of them, at least not willingly. More nations seceded from the Empire, which was weaker than ever from tension between it and the Altmeri Dominion. And then the world fell apart when he experienced love at first sight, and the pain of losing love in the blink of an eye. After that, he fell into a slump. He continued to travel and help people, but only because he had no end to his long-lasting life. More than 200 years after Fourth Era began, Aranar found himself on the Pale Pass. Where he headed was the northern home of the Nords, the only country he had never explored despite his age. Skyrim. Chapter 1. The Pale Pass. Aranar. Though still technically within the borders of Cyrodiil, 3 days north of Bruma, Aranar already hated the cold of Skyrim. He traded his simple cloak for one lined with bear fur, but it did little to warm him in his old steel armor. It was the fierce winds more than anything that chilled him to the bone as he walked the Pale Pass. He held his armored hand in front of him and conjured a small flame. Aranar hadn't the aptitude for magic beyond simple destruction and restoration spells, despite his hundreds of years walking Tamriel. Still, the small fire did its job of warming him, and would do so as long as his low reserve of magicka would allow. No wonder Nords have built up a natural resistance to the cold. Aranar himself had a bit of Nordic descent, which was evident in his pale skin and large build, but he was mostly of imperial blood. You'd have to be able to deal with the year-long snowy climate. Nighttime was an hour away when his magicka reserve finally ran empty and his fire went out. Oh well, he sighed. At least I should be in Skyrim by now, where he hoped to find temporary refuge in the village of Helgen and restock before setting out to explore the rest of the country. Not long afterward, he decided to find a place to sleep for the night. He wandered a few minutes longer, trying to find the best area to set up camp while still being relatively close to the road. Just as he thought he'd located a decent clearing, a light dancing in the middle of dense woods caught his eye. Another traveler? Or something worse. Curiosity drove him to investigate further, just to be certain he wouldn't be camping within walking distance of a cutthroat. As he neared the camp, Aranar realized there was more than one traveler. There were at least 4 small tents, each facing a large bonfire in the center of the camp. Further from the fire was a large tent, though this one appeared to be more of a war room than a place of rest. 6 silhouettes surrounded a table placed in the middle of the tent. Aranar couldn't make out their faces, but considering how tall they were and their shared accents, he guessed them to be Nords. The scouts have reported no sight of any Imperial troops, but I still believe we should move further south, a gruff male voice said. Aranar slowed, trying to remain as silent as possible in his clunky armor as he continued towards the large tent. He wanted to get a better look at the Nords. He heard a different man say, Tullius wouldn't look for me in Cyrodiil, regardless of how close we are to the border. The Imperials have Folkreath hold. It's possible that Tullius had... A loud crack rang out throughout the camp, rendering it silent. Aranar looked down and cursed at himself, for he'd stepped on a rather large twig. Before he could even think about retreating, a group of about 15 Nords, including the ones from the large tent, formed a circle around him, each man armed with a sword or knocked bow. All but 2 of the Nords wore helmets. One was a man with long, ragged blonde hair and a small, trimmed beard of a matching color. His light leather armor was covered with a blue cloth. Looking around, Aranar noticed all the Nords wore blue somewhere on their bodies. The other Nord lacking a helmet had blondish-brown hair of equal length to the other man's, but more well-kept. He had a small goatee that was tightly groomed. His armor did not appear to be very protective, if it was at all, but did appear more comfortable than the rest of the Nord's armor. Combined with his authoritative stance and the nervous glances his men gave him, he was clearly the group's leader. The leader sized up Aranar, which might have proven difficult given his distance from the campfire. Aranar's hair was a dark chocolate brown that clung closely to his head, ruffled and far shorter than either of the Nords. His beard stretched out across his entire face, but was very wild. The camp was quiet for the longest time. Aranar wasn't truly worried about the situation, but he was getting anxious. Finally, the leader cleared his throat and spoke.
An Imperial, but he doesn't look like one of Tullius's. Who are you?
My name is Aranar Krex, and no, I'm not one of his men. Whoever he is, he answered. The leader's brow rose up slightly.
An Imperial who doesn't know of General Tullius? Odd. I suppose you don't know who we are, then.
Aranar shook his head. The leader lowered his steel sword and placed it back in his sheath, prompting the others to follow his example.
I am Ulfric Stormcloak, and these are the true sons and daughters of Skyrim, the Stormcloaks,
the leader, Ulfric, explained. Aranar recognized the name. He'd heard news in Bruma that the Stormcloak Rebellion, a plague on Skyrim since the end of the Great War, had gone too far and killed the High King of Skyrim. He imagined it was the rebellion leader standing before him that did the deed.
What brings you this far north of the Imperial City?
Ulfric asked. Aranar really didn't know. He'd avoided Skyrim for most of his life, with the exception of the island of Solstheim, which now was technically part of Skyrim since the eruption of Red Mountain. Something in him had told him to finally make the venture north of his homeland. To explore, Aranar replied, not entirely lying. I've seen most of Tamriel, and Skyrim would put me one step closer to seeing all of it. The blonde Nord snorted.
You must have started traveling since you were a child to have seen so much.
Ulfric raised his hand.
Relax, Raylov. You don't need to be hostile towards him. He hasn't shown himself to be a threat. Yet.
Aranar mentally kicked himself. So much of his time he spent traveling alone, and so he often forgot he didn't look nearly as old as he truly was. After all, it was a little over a week following his 24th name day that he had been infected with Corpus. His line of thought was interrupted by the sound of another twig snapping. Then another. A symphony of cracks and snaps blasted through the camp from nearly every direction other than directly behind him. The Stormcloaks were equally confused, glancing into the dark forest, unable to see what was making the noises. Ulfric realized too late what was happening and attempted to warn his men.
Imperials!
He cried out. From out of the darkness approached mounted horses, carrying men that wore legionnaire armor and wielded an assortment of weapons. Their numbers were at least triple that of the Stormcloaks, if not more. The Stormcloaks brought their weapons back out, prepared to attack. Ulfric called them off.
Drop your weapons! Fighting would mean our deaths.
Reluctantly, the Stormcloaks listened, letting their weapons hit the ground before raising their hands up in a clear sign of surrender. Aranar was trying to decide what his next move would be. On one hand, he knew that he could overpower anyone who dared attack him, even if they fought him in pairs of 3 or 4. On the other hand, he recognized that the Empire had plenty of reason to capture the Stormcloaks, even if the Stormcloaks had plenty of reason to rebel as well. Not wanting to shed blood on either side, for how suspicious it must appear to the Stormcloaks that Aranar, an Imperial, appeared in their camp moments before the Imperial Legion did the same. And deciding this wasn't his quarrel, Aranar turned and ran for the Pale Pass. "We got a runner!" he heard someone behind him shout almost instantly. As Aranar stepped back onto the frozen trail, he stumbled in the snow, narrowly dodging an arrow that would have pierced his unprotected head. He faced the camp and saw he was being chased by 4 horses, 3 carrying archers, while a 4th held an Imperial soldier with a torch. Aranar charged blindly on the snow-covered path, unable to see any further than he could stretch out his arms. He could hear the Imperials getting closer, could see their arrows getting closer as they adjusted to shooting on horseback on uneven terrain. Suddenly, Aranar stopped, falling onto his back after running into a tree. How did a tree sprout in the middle of the damn road? Then the tree neighed, further confusing Aranar. Who is there?" a Nord asked in a whimper from somewhere nearby. Aranar didn't have a chance to answer. The Imperials arrived upon the scene. Torchlight flooded over him, and he saw that he'd run into a horse. Pulling the horse forward was a dirty Nord with dark hair and torn, ragged clothes. The Imperials trained their bows on Erenar and the Nord. Erenar stood up slowly, placing his hands above his head. The dirty Nord did the same, albeit one hand clutching the reins of his horse. The legionnaire with the torch, an Imperial woman with dark skin and hair, stared at him. "An Imperial fighting for the Stormcloaks? How treacherous can you be?" she asked. "He isn't a Nord," one of the archers said, "and he isn't wearing their colors." "That doesn't matter," the captain said. "He could be a sellsword." "I came across their camp on my way to Skyrim," Erenar protested. "I have no affiliation with the Stormcloaks, or the Legion for that matter." "Convenient," said the captain. "Too convenient for my tastes. You're coming with us to Helgen." She regarded the dirty Nord. "And you too, horse thief." Erenar almost thought it was funny they planned to bring him to Helgen, his own chosen destination. "I will go with you then. One of your commanders is bound to believe me and release me from your custody. Perhaps this, General Tullius will hear me out. And if he doesn't, I always have the moon and star." The captain smiled, and something about it bothered Erenar. "Perhaps." She grabbed a coiled line of rope from the side of her horse and tossed it to one of her men. "Bind their hands and tie them to your mount." He nodded, dismounted, and approached the two prisoners. He fastened Erenar's hands first, nice and tight so that Erenar couldn't move them. He flashed a marred grin as he took True Flame and slid the ancient blade into his own belt. "Nice sword." "I expect to get that back once I'm released," Erenar warned. "I'll be the first to applaud you if you manage that," the Imperial sneered. "What with your head rolling next to Ulfric's?" There was too much confidence in his taunt for it to be simple mocking. An execution without trial? This is not the Empire I know. Uriel Septim would have sentenced Ulfric and his men properly, but then, the Septims have been gone for a long time. Erenar refused to join them. He threw all his weight forward and smashed the soldier onto the ground. Risking an arrow to his back, Erenar again attempted to flee. He forgot all about the rope that bound him and that the man held the other end. The man jerked the rope and tugged Erenar off his feet. Erenar recovered fast, but not before the other riders caught up to and enclosed him. "This one's a feisty one," said the rope holder. "Might just want to put him down now." Erenar bucked his arms, throwing the man towards him. "If I can get the rope, I can escape." "You know what?" Erenar turned his head to face the captain, whose boot was level with his face. "I agree." She brought her steel boot down on Erenar's face, and the world went black. Chapter 2. Alone in the Woods. Erenar. Erenar awoke with a deep inhale of air, as if he'd not been breathing. His hand passed over his face, and he winced at the sting of a horizontal cut across his nose, covered in dried blood. Oh, joy. I needed another scar. He opened his eyes and was momentarily blinded by the sun hanging in the middle of the sky. He found himself lying in the snow, exactly where he'd fallen before. All of his supplies, from his steel armor to rucksack, had been stripped from him, just like True Flame had. Erenar was surprised the star and moon ring was still on his finger. At least they didn't take everything. He rose up from the ground, shivering now that he was unprotected from the cold. Thankfully, the wind had died down, else he would be far worse off. Regardless, standing in the snow in just his socks would mean the loss of his feet if he didn't get something on them soon. As far as Erenar could tell, he was alone in the woods. He could see the Stormcloak camp from where he stood, and there wasn't a soul in sight. Unsure of what he would find, he staggered to the camp. The abandoned camp, as it were. All that was left of its occupants were footprints in the snow and the dying embers of last night's fire. The tents were there, and most of the Stormcloak's supplies remained inside. Aranar didn't hesitate in plundering numerous chests for boots, heavier clothing, and cloaks that would suit him. Some armor was available, though all of it was decorated in Stormcloak blue, or brandished their standard of a roaring bear. Food, weapons, and, had there ever been any, potions, seemed to be the only thing the Legion had appropriated from the camp. Healing his face with his magic instead, Aranar considered the night's events and came to a realization. He'd have been easy to take prisoner in his unconscious state, yet he'd been left behind. The Legionnaire had agreed that killing him would be better than killing him later. He'd woken without breath, after more than 12 hours lying in the snow. The Imperial's boot hadn't knocked him out. Damn, Aranar sighed as he cleaned the dried blood off his face with snow from the ground. That bitch killed me. Aranar's case of corpus was special, and not just because he was the only person to be cured of its more negative effects, like insanity and cancerous growths all along his body. Immortality and immunity to all known diseases had been granted to him. Immortality in the sense that he would never age. Later, to his surprise, he learned he'd been given true immortality. Sure, he could, and had several times through the years, die. But he would come back to life. His stomach rumbled. Aranar didn't like it, but Helgen was the nearest settlement he knew of to go find something to eat. As he started back down the Pale Pass, his mind wandered to the first time he'd died. Aranar was in Cyrodiil. Anvil, to be exact, months after leaving Morrowind, and was on his way to help a merchant in the harbor district who was having trouble with thieves. As he was about to enter Norbert's, a female high elf approached him. "Can you help me?" Aranar shrugged. "Depends on what you need help with." She pointed to a ship that was sitting alongside the port, its name printed on the side, the Serpent's Wake. "I hired Hurwin to clear out my ship, but she's been gone almost 2 hours now." Aranar didn't know who Hurwin was, but suspected she was from the Fighters Guild. "What is she clearing out?" "She's getting rid of the ghosts of my dead crew." Aranar gave her a skeptical look. "Ghosts?" "It's a long story. Please, will you look for her? I'm worried that she is injured, or worse." Aranar nodded. "If she's alive, I'll bring her out." He walked onto the Serpent's Wake and entered a door leading to the lower decks. He climbed down the ladder slowly, hoping he wouldn't alert the ghosts. A loud creak echoed throughout the entire deck when Aranar stepped on the floor. In the next room, he heard a low moan. So much for discretion. Aranar drew his sword and charged into the room, slicing through the floating green wraith. The wraith's form disintegrated before his very eyes. It let out a screech as it disintegrated into ashes. Aranar walked out of the room into the adjacent hallway. As he passed by a door, he heard a crash from behind it, followed by someone cursing quietly. "Hello?" Aranar asked as he opened the door. "Arr!" The woman screamed as she tried to stab Aranar. Aranar parried the woman's blade, then swiped the sword from her hand. "Watch it!" he yelled at her. "I heard a loud screech, and when you opened the door, I thought the ghosts were going to get me." "I killed one," Aranar informed her. She looked at him in awe. "How did you kill one? My sword sailed straight through it without doing a thing." He smiled. "That didn't stop you from trying to decapitate me when I opened the door, huh?" When she didn't return his smile, he continued in a more serious tone. "Ghosts can only be destroyed with magic or special weapons, like enchanted blades, silver, or Daedric swords." Hurwin's eyes shifted to something behind him, and she gasped. "Look out!" Aranar wasn't able to match the speed he'd had when Hurwin tried to cut off his head. He spun to watch the wraith pierce through his armor like it was butter. The last thing he remembered before the world went dark was the taste of blood. Later, on the Pale Pass, Aranar stumbled upon another camp, one that was also abandoned but much more recently. The embers gave off some heat still. Footprints were scattered across the entire campground in several different directions, but the road revealed several wagon and horse tracks going in the same direction. Must be an Imperial camp, Aranar guessed. He departed quickly, determined to reach Helgen before sunset. He had no interest in dying again so soon from the cold. He inhaled deeply and started coughing violently, spitting up blood as he did so. His eyelids slowly parted, then shut immediately when an intense pain throughout his neck caused him to shudder. "He is waking up!" he heard Hurwen announce. Aranar blinked again, unsure where he was. The scent of seawater and the sight of the sun lowering beneath the horizon revealed he was back on the upper deck of the Serpent's Wake. Hurwen, the Altmer, and an Anvil City guard stood over him. "What happened?" he asked. "When the ghost stabbed you," Hurwen said, "I picked up your sword and cut the thing in half." Aranar realized he wasn't wearing his armor, and when he moved a hand down to the spot the wraith had stabbed him, the spot was tender and had a bloody bandage covering it. He gave a weak laugh. "Damn thing left a hole in me." "I ran back up here and summoned the guard to help me bring you up here too," Hurwen said. "You'd lost so much blood. I can't believe you lived long enough to have the Altmer here heal you." The owner of the Serpent's Wake nodded. "I've never seen someone lose as much as you did and survive. You're lucky that restoration magic has always come naturally to me." "Yeah, I guess so," Aranar said in an unconvinced tone. He felt exhausted due to half the blood in his body now coating the outside of it, so he closed his eyes. "I shouldn't be alive." A familiar presence appeared in his head. "But you are," whispered a female voice. He was surprised by the voice, as he hadn't heard from Azura since his battle with the Almalexia more than 3 years ago. "You don't seem to be grateful for this second chance at life." "Azura? Are you here, right now?" "Most of my essence remains in Moonshadow. I only needed to send a piece in order to be here. Now, why are you questioning your survival? Are you upset that your life didn't end when that cowardly wood elf distracted you from the ghost's blade?" Azura responded. "Believe me, I am far from upset about being alive. But why did I survive? Did you do this?" She ignored the question. "You didn't survive. You simply came back. The reason for this is that you are not done yet. Not in Mundus. Someone decided your existence is far too important to be ended on this boat. Though I have seen your fate, death will eventually take you. But not today. Can you tell me my fate?" "It's not my place to reveal what I have seen. However, I have a gift for you, though you won't be able to accept it for a long time," Azura explained. "A gift? Seems odd that a Daedric prince would be so gracious." "Do not think this gift comes without a price," she warned. "You will only receive it after your heart has been shredded into small bits. And even then, your reward will have to wait a little longer." With that cheerful note, Aranar felt her leave his mind. "Small bits? Well, then it better be a nice reward." The sun was almost gone from the sky when Aranar saw a village surrounded by a stone wall. The walls were covered with red flags presenting the Imperial Dragon, symbolizing the Legion's possession of what Aranar assumed was Helgen. The tracks he'd been following ended at the village's gate, which were shut. Worried as he was about walking into a Legion-controlled village and being recognized, being stuck in the unknown lands of Skyrim at night without armor or weapons, Aranar had no choice but to approach the gate. "I'll just stay low and avoid as many people as I can. What's the worst that can happen?" Thank you for listening, and thank you to Donzai Bonsai for commissioning this piece. I hope to get a chance to continue with the project. For the record, this kind of video is a lot easier for me to make than the Skyrim audio adventure, considering I didn't have to write it and I'm not putting nearly as much effort into the sound design. If you would like me to read something that you wrote, or anything, really, then you can reach out to me on Discord or email me at thekuiacat@yahoo.com. And once again, thanks for listening.